WC has become the center of naval sea power, both strategically and intellectually. Scholarly like future like
Good afternoon, and welcome to our third Issues in National Security lecture for this academic year. I'm Captain Dunn Ricino, and I'm stepping in for John Jackson, who usually hosts these lectures. I'd like to note that we are gathered here together in person, and we also have a large audience dialed in via Zoom. Over the 2024 through 2025 academic year, we will be offering 10 lectures from some of the best scholars in the world, from our resident faculty. This effort is intended to share a portion of the Naval War College's academic experience with the spouses and significant others of our student body. We also welcome participation by the entire Naval War College extended family, including members of the Naval War College Foundation, international sponsors, civilian employees, colleagues throughout Naval Station Newport, and others around the globe. While the primary purpose is to share information and learn together, we do offer documentation in the form of certificates of completion to all participants who attend at least 70% of the offered lectures. You can participate here in the audience, via Zoom, or even by watching the lectures when they are posted on YouTube. We ask you to keep track of how and when you participate, and we will ask you to self-certify your completion towards the end of this series. Now to the main event. At the conclusion of the presentation that follows, we will welcome questions from our in-person audience. Please use the microphones located at each seat so all of us, including our virtual participants, can hear the question. Let's move on to the educational portion of today's lecture. The lecture, China's Naval Expansion, will address how China is seeking to develop a world-class Navy. The People's Liberation Army leadership appears focused on developing the capabilities that improve the People's Liberation Army Navy's proficiency to execute specified missions at the operational level of war. They seek to surpass U.S.-level capabilities by pursuing novel technological and developmental pathways to become the world's most capable Navy. Our speaker will discuss how the U.S. might instill restraint in these lofty ambitions. Our lecturer is Captain Christopher Sharman, U.S. Navy retired, who now serves as director of the U.S. Naval War College's widely respected China Maritime Studies Institute. He came to this job following a 30-year active-duty Navy career that included diplomatic postings at U.S. embassies in both China and Vietnam, and multiple operational afloat assignments with the Japan-based forward-deployed naval forces. His afloat assignments included tours aboard USS Independence, with the strike group staff aboard USS Kitty Hawk, and with the 7th Fleet staff aboard USS Blue Ridge. He also served as a National Security Affairs Fellow at Stanford's Hoover Institution. His military career culminated with his assignment to the Office of the Director of National Intelligence as the Senior Strategist for the National Intelligence Manager for East Asia, with responsibilities synchronizing the intelligence community's China efforts. He has written numerous articles for various journals, is a frequent podcast guest, and published a monograph through the Institute of National Strategic Studies titled China Moves Out, Stepping Stones Toward a New Maritime Strategy. Please join me in welcoming Captain Sharman.
Well, Captain Regino, thanks very much for the kind introduction. You hear an introduction like that, you go, boy, that guy's old. And so I'm gonna have to tailor that, maybe downplay the 30 years in the Navy and that kind of thing. So, hey, listen, truly a pleasure to be here with you today. And I wanna thank you for those here in the audience for coming in after what I'm sure has been a very long day. For those of you online, thanks for spending some time with me tonight and with us tonight. And I look forward to a great dialogue. I thought what might be useful before we actually get into the lecture itself is talk a little bit about what the China Maritime Studies Institute is. The China's Maritime Institute, as I talk about this, will give you some context for the presentation that you're about to see. You'll understand how we do business and why it is that I'm presenting in the way that I am. China Maritime Studies Institute here is just some of the research that we're doing. It's part of a greater research effort going on, frankly, across all of the War College. We're focused in on China. Our specific lane is China in the military maritime domain. What this means is we're taking a look at China's Navy. We're looking at the Coast Guard. We're looking at China's maritime militia. And then we're looking at the civilian infrastructure that underpins all of that. Now, the way we do it is really what sets CMSI apart from other organizations that are looking at China. So rather than just looking at what China's doing operationally or reading about what the West is saying in China and what it's doing, is we're actually getting in and we're looking at what China is doing and saying about itself. So we're looking at China from the inside out. We're looking at and we're reading Chinese journals and papers and periodicals, every bit of open source information being published within China about China in the military maritime domain. From that, we're able to figure out, or able to discern, and we hope we're able to discern, China's plans and future trajectory for itself in the military maritime domain. So to do this, though, all of our researchers have to be able to speak Chinese. They have to be able to, I like to say they're multilingual. Of course, they have to be able to speak and read Chinese, but they also have to speak the language of military. Everyone in here knows the language of military, really, frankly, is its own language. So juxtaposing those two things, both the language, Chinese skills, and the military vernacular, is a real unique skill set. And so we blend that together to be able to discern and distill and project to be able to advise where China is going. So up here on the screen, you can see several of our product lines. I'm not going to talk about every single one of those, but I would at least flag a couple of them. Everything we do at CMSI is unclassified. Everything we do is available to everyone here to download. And I'll tell you how to do that in just a second. We have conference volumes, read books, but the things that I want to focus in on are the third from the left, the China Maritime Report, the blue-covered objects. Those China Maritime Reports, imagine a 20 or 30-page report, kind of a deep dive on a topic in the military maritime domain. Some of these reports are kind of the in-depth look on that particular topic. So we're publishing a China Maritime Report about once every month. To the right of that, the CMSI notes are for the fast-breaking items of interest, items of particular salience, we think, to policy relevance or to DoD interest. And then we are also doing translations. And when I say translations, this is not putting something into Google Translate and seeing what comes out. This is putting one or two of our professors on a particular article that we've come across and we think has particular salience, and doing a deep dive on this topic to make sure we get every word translated correctly, and then every concept translated correctly as well, so that we can then inform DoD of some thoughts and some ideas of where China's going. And then, of course, we got a newsletter, and we'll talk about those. So let's see if we can get there. Okay. To get on our mailing list, just go to the CMSI website. We'll put the website there at the top. And then if you navigate down, you will see a place to subscribe to CMSI products. That'll get everything delivered into your inbox, and would invite all of you to subscribe to our stuff. I will also flag here that there is a link on there to register for the CMSI conference. On May 14th and 15th, here in this auditorium, we will hold our biennial conference. The conference is going to be looking at the people of China in the military maritime domain. So looking at the people, the Navy, and the other maritime forces. It's going to be a great conference with some really just world-renowned scholars that are part of it. So all of you that are in the government, it's no problem. We're going to have room for you. You're welcome to sign. If you are not in the government and you're interested in participating, there's a link that'll connect with me. We can talk about possibly getting you in as long as there's space, and that's going to be the constraint there. So welcome you to come on. So with that, let's go ahead and get started on the presentation itself. The title of the presentation that I want to give you is China's World-Class Navy in the New Era. So when I say in the new era, and it's titled very deliberately this The "in the new era" is a reference to the Xi Jinping era. Xi Jinping, the president of China, chairman of the Central Military Commission, and the general secretary of the Communist Party. This is China's Navy in his era, and so we're going to be talking about Xi Jinping. You'll see throughout this presentation that Xi Jinping has and plays a very disproportionate role and influence on the trajectory of where China is going in the Navy. So I thought it might be wise to let's go ahead and start with Xi Jinping himself. I think what I'd like to do is I'd like to start with a little bit of a story. The story, I'm going to put you in a time machine, and I'm going to take you back to April 12th of 2018. On April 12th, 2018, the morning, very early morning of that day, Xi Jinping was in Beijing. He flew down to the southern island province of Hainan Island, China's gateway to the South China Sea. When he landed, he got down and he traversed over to Yulin Naval Base, which is a nearby naval base down at the southern tip of Hainan Island. He was accompanied by other members of the Central Military Commission, and then upon arrival, he then went aboard the brow, he crossed the brow of one of, at the time, China's newest destroyers, the Chinese ship Changsha. It had been commissioned just 3 years before this date. As he got to the quarterdeck, he saluted smartly and was saluted smartly, and the appropriate honors were rendered. Xi Jinping then went and reviewed the color guard on board the ship. As he reviewed the color guard, parading in front of the color guard there, the band, if you can imagine, the band is playing patriotic tunes, and it's a real pomp and circumstance environment here for the Navy. This is a big deal when the commander-in-chief is going on any ship, but this ship's a chance to shine. Incidentally, if you take a look at the decks, a pretty spotless ship here for a flight deck on a platform. Anyone who's been on any ship. Anyway. So Xi Jinping finishes reviewing the color guard. He then goes into the skin of the ship. The horn blows, the Changsha's propeller begins to rotate, and Changsha is underway. Changsha transits about an hour south of Hainan Island. There, the Changsha rendezvous with 48 warships for what is the largest naval review by tonnage in the history of China. You can see the ships here organized in column formation, organized by mission sets, 7 different mission sets. Flying overhead are 76 airframes that are in 10 different sections. This is a massive naval review that Changsha is reviewing. Now, this massive display of China force is what is really impressive about this is over half of the ships participating in this naval review were commissioned in the Xi Jinping era. This is Xi Jinping's Navy. This is the Navy that Xi Jinping built. And it should be no surprise to any of us that Chinese press focused in on this fact. Chinese press focuses in, they say this whole naval review is a celebration of the great efforts and the latest achievements in the Navy modernization in the new era. In other words, in the Xi Jinping era. This is Xi Jinping's Navy. So here we know that China has the most number of warships. We know they have aircraft carriers. They have the largest shipyard infrastructure and the most extensive maritime industry and the fastest expansion in ship production capacity in the history of the world. These are a lot of superlatives for the Chinese Navy. So the question is this a world-class Navy? Is this what China wants to have? Well, to answer that question, we need to turn back to Xi Jinping himself and see what Xi Jinping had to say about it. At the end of this naval review, after Xi Jinping has watched these ships traverse by, after he's watched aircraft flight operations from the Liaoning aircraft carrier that was sailing by, Xi Jinping gives a very important speech, and it's characterized as a very important speech in the Chinese literature. What he says is that we will unswervingly accelerate the modernization process of the Navy, be good at innovation, have the courage to surpass, and strive to build the People's Navy into a world-class Navy. In other words, Xi Jinping is not talking about the present status of the Navy. Xi Jinping is looking forward. Xi Jinping's idea of the Navy and building a world-class Navy is something in the future. So that despite all these great superlatives that you've seen, he's not satisfied for where China's Navy is today. He's very much looking into the forward into the future. This was the first time that Xi Jinping had actually said that he wants to build a world-class Navy. And that he really punctuated his speech by saying that the time he focused in on the urgency. This is something that he wants to do in near term, and this is something that he wants to build very, very quickly for China. So now he gave this speech at the Naval Review, but it's not the first time the military had heard about this idea of being a world-class military in some sort. If you go back just a couple months before this Naval Review, at the 19th Party Congress, the Party Congress is a time when all Chinese leadership gets together. They talk about what they did over the last several years, and they look forward. Where are they going in the future? But at the 19th Party Congress, Xi Jinping says, we're going to modernize our military by 2035, and by mid-century, we're going to transform the military into world-class forces. Now, this is, again, 2017 the speech is being given. Okay, 2035, that's a good 18 years away. Okay, that's a good lofty goal. Mid-century, that's over 30 years away at this point. You know, you can pretty much say anything to kind of say what you want to build in the future and say it's kind of a long-term goal and you're building that. And Xi Jinping was certainly very deliberate in his statement, saying that's where he's going. But the fact of the matter is they are not looking at mid-century. In fact, they're looking much earlier than mid-century to develop these world-class military goals. Fast forward now to 2022, after the 20th Party Congress, 5 years later. I saw this report come out from a Senior Colonel Joe Bo, a person actually I interacted with when I was in Beijing. And he was talking about, out of the 20th Party Congress, that China had accelerated its world-class military goals. And so I said, where's he getting this? How is he doing it? So I started doing some digging, and sure enough, I pulled out the work report that came out, that's published after the 20th Party Congress in 2022. The work report is something that if you need to sleep, it's a great tool to help you do so. Very, very painful to get through. However, there's some key word searches you can do. And as you get down to a key section of this work report, you see the statement that says that we are more quickly going to elevate our people's armed forces to world-class standards. In other words, we need to move this goal of becoming a world-class Navy much earlier or earlier than what were talked about earlier in the mid-century goals. And that's reflected by what Joe Bo said in his interview that we saw. Now, how early is this goal? I don't know. I know it's before mid-century, but when you look at where this statement is placed in context of the work report, it's put right next to a statement about China's 2027 goals. China's 2027 goals are to develop the capabilities to counter the U.S. in the Indo-Pacific region and to compel Taiwan's leadership to the negotiation table on Beijing's terms. Okay, it doesn't mean that this idea of building a world-class military is tied to 2027, but we know it's certainly earlier than mid-century. So this is more of a near-term goal than something in the distant future, a mid-century thing. So this is very real for what China is working on today and where they're going. Now, what does it mean to be a world-class military? Frankly, you ask any historian, and you'll get a slightly different answer of what constitutes being a world-class military. For those of you who are relatively recent history fans, you look back at the Washington Naval Conference back in 1921. They looked at tonnage and the caliber of guns. And that was the evaluation for what made a Navy strong. They looked at how many ships and how heavy they were with their weapon systems. Today we might tweak that and say, maybe it's not caliber of guns, maybe it's long-range missile systems you could put in there. Obviously, different technologies. Other analysts have taken a look at other militaries and they say, no, it's the number of ships that you can take out to sea that are blue water capable. You really need to focus on those. And still others will say, no, it's that integration of technology. And if you can integrate all those technologies and capitalize on that technology, that's what makes you world class. Still others will just focus in on defense spending. If you're spending the most on defense and research, that's what's going to make you world class. So as we're doing this research, I started doing the research on China's world-class Navy, and it was really funny. As some of the first ideas started coming out, you saw some Chinese military authors start looking around going, gosh, what does this mean for us? What does this world-class Navy idea mean for us? And they actually, some of them kind of freaked out. I like this quote in particular. And they say, gosh, there's still a long way to go before we can become a world-class Navy. And depending on what criteria, depending on what standards you use, there are different measures for what makes a world-class Navy. But frankly, it doesn't matter what we say about what is a world-class Navy. What matters most is what China believes is a world-class Navy. So let's focus in on what China says about what that is. And gosh, how are we going to do that? Well, thank God. We have China's admiral who convened all of China's Navy leadership in just 2 months after Xi Jinping called for building world-class military forces. This is a picture here of former Navy commander, Admiral Shen Jinlong. He was the Navy commander from 2017 to 2021, I believe. And very influential guy in their system. How are we going to know what he said and what they mean about becoming a world-class Navy? Well, this is where CMSI really, really punches above its weight. Because what we look at is we look at what the Chinese articles are saying about it. Now, in the Chinese system, they have to communicate to each other about important policy decisions. There are certainly classified networks they're communicating on. We're not going to have any visibility into those. But there's a need to communicate in open source, to talk about how they're getting some of their ideas, to get that information out to really all levels of the fleet. And if we can tap into those open sources, that's where we can really, really shine. So in this case, Admiral Shen, he got the Navy together, he got the Navy's senior leadership together, and had this meeting about what becoming a world-class Navy actually means. What you see on the left there is an article from what's called Renmin Haijun, or People's Navy. And it actually details out the general gist of what came out of this meeting. We don't have the verbatim transcript. We'll never have the verbatim transcript of what came out. But in this, we found 3 key themes of what makes a world-class Navy. According to Shen Jinlong, theme number 1, or first characteristic, is a world-class Navy is a Navy that has global strategic influence. Now, when you say global strategic influence, that can mean a lot of different things. You can think you're going to be a hegemon or whatever. Shen was very careful. He says, gosh, as we have global strategic influence, we want to align this with peaceful development for China. That's at least what he's saying, at least what was captured in the press pieces. The second characteristic of a world-class Navy is sea control. Now, sea control is if we control the sea, if we can't control the sea, we are controlled by the sea. We're going to talk about sea control a little bit later. And the third characteristic was technological innovation. Here, Shen spent a disproportionate amount of time, at least according to the articles we read about this meeting, about the technologies. In particular, he said that China has a historic opportunity to seize the high ground, that we are committed to using smart technologies and ideas to address the shortcomings and weaknesses of the Navy. So he sees technology as a key enabler for the Navy's technological, or for the Navy's development. But the focus here of Shen's speech is on the following. That is, that it's not just about building ships and widgets and with certain capabilities. We need to move from a capabilities-based Navy to a needs-based Navy. In other words, let's not just develop ships and platforms, let's develop them for a purpose. And the purpose here is we need to focus on what are the future missions of the Navy. So you can see this focus and this theme that you're going to see throughout this presentation is a focus on missions. And this is where Shen first shined. So this was 2017 that Shen gave his speech. I'm going to now bring you a little bit more to modern days. 2023, just an article in the Academy of Military Science Military History Journal. The Academy of Military Science is a very authoritative PRC publication or organization that publishes very authoritative guidance. To be published in this journal, everything has to be very, very, very approved at the most senior levels. So you can take what's being said in this journal as gospel for where PRC is going on some of the military issues. So in this journal, in 2023, we see the same three characteristics that are discussed by Admiral Shen are then reflected in this journal article. So in the first, but what's great about this is this journal article then expands on some of these ideas and some of the concepts that go with these various characteristics. So first of all, this article talks about global strategic influence. And it describes global strategic influence as a Navy that can strengthen China's international voice. It can have influence in international maritime governance. It can deter and stop wars. It can stabilize international tensions and can demonstrate strategic support for the world. Now, the vast majority of these sound relatively altruistic, sound relatively peaceful. This idea of deterring and stopping wars is a little bit more muscular. But generally, this sounds relatively peaceful. So how has this played out in recent years? Well, just one little snapshot will take you to, let's take a look at how China has been operating in the near seas. Now, what you see in this graphic are three different images. None of these are Navy. You don't see Navy anywhere in any of these various disputes. And what you see is China's Coast Guard that is using its water cannons to pound Philippine fishing boats they're going out to resupply islands. What you see is the Senkaku Islands there and China's Coast Guard penetrating in and operating within the contiguous zone or Japan's territorial waters. And what you see is an incident back in 2014 where China took an oil derrick, plopped it in Vietnam's exclusive economic zone, and started drilling. And Vietnam had to respond, and it became a very, very tense confrontation. None of these are Navy. All you see is Coast Guard. What you don't see is the Navy's right on the horizon in every single one of these pictures. China's Navy and China's military practices echelon defense. Echelon defense, imagine these concentric circles of defense. You may have maritime militia, maybe the closest in, and the ones actually taking on a fishing boat, et cetera. But then it goes, the Coast Guard is going to be that next layer. The Navy is right behind it, ready to support any sort of escalation necessity. So this idea of, going back, this idea of global strategic influence, okay, sounds real peaceful. In practice, at least in the near seas, doesn't appear necessarily to be all that peaceful. It doesn't necessarily mean that's going to translate to the far seas. We can talk about that in a little bit. But let's go back to this article again. The second characteristic that is elaborated on is this idea of sea control. Now, sea control frankly, has been part of China's naval strategy since 1986. In this article, it says, from the age of exploration onwards, history shows that competition for sea control is an important factor for influencing the overall picture in terms of competition in modern times. So there's a real recognition that sea control is key. But it's really important to understand when we hear the word sea control, how does China and how does China's Navy define sea control? They actually don't have a definition for sea control the way we would have a definition for sea control. In fact, what they define it as is command of the sea. And when you read what command of the sea means the right to control a certain sea area within a certain period of time during combat. So limited in scope. And to seize command of the sea, the Navy's usually the lead force and supported by the other forces. So it's a very different way of looking at sea control, perhaps, than we may consider as we hear the term sea control. They're using the term regularly, they're just defining it differently. So the third characteristic, again, we see this continuity with Admiral Shen's speech and Admiral Shen's meeting. This third characteristic focused in on technological innovation. Again, this article spends perhaps a disproportionate amount of time focusing in on the technology angle. What it says is the key to victory is achieving intelligent combat dominance through precise attacks and defenses with weapons and systems that mix man and machine. And it's this focus on being the first one to incorporate and to integrate these technologies that seems to be where they're moving. So whoever wins the first mover advantage will win the revolution in intelligent technologies. Again, you see this theme of competition. This competition with who? Gosh, there's only one out there. That's looking at us. Other authors talking about this idea of integrating technologies talk about these technologies as being something that will leapfrog China's Navy. Leapfrog against what? The United States Navy. So technology, a key enabler. When you can't just say this and not show something about it. So just 2023 article. So after the 20th Party Congress in 2022, there was an emphasis in this Party Congress about technologies and integrating technologies into the military. And Xi Jinping emphasized the acceleration of developing unmanned combat forces. So then in 2023, 1 year later, there's this article that comes out talking about dominating the battlefield, the advantages of unmanned intelligent combat forces. This article talks specifically about this integration of these technologies, this leapfrog capabilities that they've been talking about. Here, integrating in warfighting applications of these kinds of technologies where they're talking about swarm operations, surprise attacks, autonomous reconnaissance, strikes on predetermined targets, and the use of autonomous vehicles, et cetera, for deception. They also talk about artificial intelligence as enabling decision-making. Now, that decision-making can help at the tactical level, where it affects, do you steer, port or starboard at any particular time? Or do you fire a particular weapon at any particular time? But it also talks about the ubiquity of information and how the idea is that even at the highest levels, they can see down to the tactical picture and have a sense for how this is all going to operate together. So it's the decision-making support. So it shouldn't be surprising if there's this focus on artificial intelligence, this focus on integrating technologies, that we're starting to see actually organizations that are trying to market to the military in China technologies that are capabilities that incorporate some of these technologies. An example here is in this graphic right here, which shows a side-scanning UUV that can use backscatter echoes of seabed targets for detection. So there's clearly a push to develop systems, essentially sell them into the military and have them incorporated in. So we're seeing a big push for going down the artificial intelligence route. Now, all this is good, and this is all kind of pie in the sky, but let's put some real meat on the bone here. 2019, which is 1 year after that massive fleet review that we saw, we see China and the PLA publish what's called its defense white paper. A defense white paper is a public document. You can go on the web right now and you can download Google the defense white paper and you can find it. It'll also put you right to sleep. A little more interesting than the other document. However, the defense white paper is a public reflection of the policies and guidance that have already been promulgated within the PRC system. They're just now capturing this to describe China's strategy, but in a public way. It is for public consumption, both domestically but also internationally. So why I'm focusing in on this defense white paper is it's a particularly important time, because here is the first time we really see the publication for the Western audience of the guidance that the PRC is trying to develop a world-class military. It calls, in fact, to basically complete modernization of national defense and the military by 2035 and to fully transform the people's armed forces into world-class military forces by mid-21st century. Sounds an awful lot like what Xi Jinping said back in 2017. It's just codified here. What's interesting about the Defense White Paper is it gets into how they're going to do it. Section 3 of the Defense White Paper talks about fulfilling the mission in the new era, the Xi Jinping era. Here it describes the missions that China's military should be able to achieve and how they're going to go after them. And what you see is these missions align very, very closely with what Shen Jinglong described and the characteristics he described way back in 2017. So let's talk about these missions. Mission number 1, protecting overseas interests. And you can see how that's specified in the Defense White Paper, but you can see how Shen's idea of having a Navy that has global strategic influence kind of nests in with this mission. Similarly, participating in disaster and rescue relief is a mission for the PLA. This idea of global strategic influence folds into that one. Thirdly, safeguarding national territorial sovereignty and maritime rights and interests. That's listed as the top mission for the PLA. Number 1, sea control for the Navy is a way that they can support that overall PLA mission. And fourth, it talks about cyber, space, and nuclear developments, getting at these technological developments that Shen talked about back in 2017. So again, you see these overall PLA missions described in the Defense White Paper, but you can see how the Navy's missions nest very nicely inside the overall mission sets. Now, if missions are the focus of the PLA, and missions are where the PLA is going, and missions are what they are using as the criteria to evaluate their success at becoming a world-class Navy, then we can evaluate how are they doing on these missions. So let's take a look at these various missions and let's talk about each one. First, let's talk about the most important of these missions. That is the mission to safeguard national territorial sovereignty and maritime rights and interests. Now, this is not, when you say territorial rights and interests and sovereignty, this is not talking about a global mission. This is focused on the Western Pacific. And this is focused on what China wants to be able to do with its Navy and with its military in the Western Pacific. So to do this mission, to safeguard national territorial sovereignty and maritime rights and interests requires sea control capabilities. The Navy's got to be able to execute sea control. Now, the area to do this, the most difficult area for China to be able to do this is around Taiwan in a contested environment. The competition, imagine Taiwan forces or perhaps United States forces or allied forces that are sailing in the area. So let's talk about how they're doing on this mission. Let's go back to 2022. If you all remember recent history, Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, visited Taiwan. Visit got a heck of a lot of attention. As soon as she left, the PLA, the PRC, wanted to demonstrate its displeasure about her visit to Taiwan. Immediately after the visit, the PLA conducted a very large exercise. That exercise from the Navy side included 14 surface combatants and at least one submarine. Excuse me one second. This exercise, at the time, these 14 surface combatants, these at least one submarine, were we don't know exactly from the open source, we don't know exactly where they were operating, but the PLA identified several different exercise areas which they could be operating. With the number of ships that they had out there, the kind of cruise missiles they carry, they would have had overlapping surface-to-surface missile capabilities around the entire island with just those 14 ships. Now, at the time, this exercise was called by many in the Western press to be they called it the fourth Taiwan Strait crisis. Everybody was up in arms about this. This was 14 ships. Let's fast forward 2 years. 2 years, just last October, one of the Joint Sword 2024 exercises. In this exercise, China had 17 ships, an unknown number of submarines. Press didn't talk about it. This exercise is bigger than what we saw back in 2022, and we've become blasé about these exercises. They become the new normal. China just goes out and does these exercises. The fact of the matter is they are normalizing these operations around Taiwan. So China's Navy is currently practicing this mission of safeguarding national territorial sovereignty and maritime rights and interests around Taiwan. So what are the takeaways from these exercises that we're seeing? First, we know that they can deploy enough ships that they're going to give China overlapping and redundant anti-ship cruise missile coverage around Taiwan. The number of ships they deploy, they would probably need to add additional ships to have surface-to-air coverage. But when you're operating around Taiwan, you have, remember the Navy's in the lead, you have the other services to back you up. You have land-based surface-to-air missiles coverage that can back you up and provide that air coverage that you need. So these exercises show that the Navy's going to operate as part of a joint force to deny water space. But where the challenge is, at least from the articles that we're reading about China's Navy operations, pulled both from these exercises, but some other exercises around it, is that as you integrate so many ships that are coming in, that are playing as part of these exercises, and you have the Chinese PLA Air Force that are participating in the exercise, you have a tremendous amount of military assets operating in the same general area. There's a C5 ISR challenge that they are working through. They know it's a problem, they're working on that, but they acknowledge that. Logistics and undersea warfare, you don't see tremendous emphasis on those disciplines in these exercises. Doesn't mean they're actually not working on it, but it's an area that at least was not emphasized, absent. So, but what you can pull from this is that if China's goal is to develop a world-class military over time, something before mid-century, they're pretty much on track for doing this in the waters around Taiwan, in the waters in the near seas. So let's go to the next exercise, or the next concept. The next mission is protecting overseas interests. Now, this idea of protecting overseas interests, this has profound impacts on the Navy. 90% of China's trade by volume goes by sea, and there are millions of Chinese that are working overseas. China's national interests are global. Some of the authoritative Chinese documents talk about China's future overseas missions to be oriented towards diversified non-war missions. That is, the kinds of missions that are humanitarian in nature or non-combatant evacuation operations. One Chinese author says, wherever our ships sail, wherever our warships go, wherever our overseas interests expand, our people's Navy should be there. This is a global focus for where the Navy wants to go. Now, it doesn't mean that where they're going to go is going to be all peaceful. There is a concept, besides the fact that it's mostly focused on non-wartime missions, that there's this concept of far seas mobile operations. Far seas mobile operations, the whole idea of these operations are to be able to damage or attack key enemy strategic passages or sea lines of communication. But it's not designed to be a test against a peer competitor. They know that they can't necessarily at this point right now project power and sustain power in the far seas outside of waters, way away from China, and sustain that. So it's a limited operation, but it's a concept that they're certainly working on, they're integrating in. Back in 2016, they said, we'll accelerate the construction of far seas mobile operations combat system. So the implications here. It does appear that the plan will want to avoid contingencies that don't involve vital interests. It is very likely, because of China's global interests, that we're going to see a significant uptick in their far seas deployments are likely. And that as China's Navy goes abroad, that need for port access is going to be increasingly important. We're going to talk about that in just a second. And then to support and sustain this force that is operating around the world, they're going to need more supply ship capabilities. So they are on track for this mission set. China's been going around the world for years already now. Back in 2002, they did their first around-the-world deployment. This is just a smattering of the headlines of where China's Navy has been operating in the last several years. Since 2008, they have maintained a 3-ship task force in the Gulf of Aden that operates continuously. When that Gulf of Aden task force finishes its counter-piracy deployment, it then deploys around to various points around the world, to the Mediterranean, to the Atlantic, around Africa. They are deploying around the world. So this is just a smattering of the places that they're going. So if they're operating in the world, how are they going to sustain this force? A little bit hard to see, but this is a graphic that shows where China has a stake in port interests around the world, not just in any countries, but in countries that have signed the Belt and Road Initiative agreements with China. The darker colors are where China owns a more majority stake in these ports. It doesn't mean that and by the way, every single one of these triangles are suitable for military port visits if needed. They have the depth that would support military port visits. So China has the capacity to go around the world leveraging the commercial port system. So let's talk about the third mission set, and that is participating in disaster and rescue relief. Now, disaster and rescue relief is listed third in this mission set, suggesting perhaps lesser of importance, but still an important mission set. Here, in the defense white paper, it appears to be talking about PLA support for domestic disasters, but for the Navy, this has some more strategic implications. For the Navy, this requires that the Navy develops expeditionary force capabilities. So for China's Navy, we see this article that came out in 2021 that talks about the expeditionary force capabilities that China wants to and that is developing. China's expeditionary forces are no longer limited to traditional landing operations and seizing control of offshore islands. The missions for the amphibious forces are forward presence, maritime deterrence, choke point control, escort operations, overseas defense, and humanitarian rescue. And oh, by the way, forward deployment to hotspots and key points overseas. This is not a benign Navy. This is not a benign amphibious force. This is a force going out for operations. So disaster and rescue relief may in fact be listed a little lower down in their priority mission sets, but we're going to see a buildup of their amphibious forces, and those amphibious forces are going to be deploying further and around the world more frequently. To do this, though, they're going to have to get more experience operating overseas. So we're going to see more integration of China's Navy and their Marine Corps operating together, and I think we're going to start seeing more amphibious forces that are built. So we're already seeing, just last month, we saw some very large deck amphibious platforms that are rolled out. So again, right now, China appears to be on track for this mission set. 2 slides to go. So here are your takeaways. The Navy's aggressively seeking to build a world-class Navy. I think I've hit that point. Its goal is to do it considerably earlier than mid-century. On the mission sets that China perceives are its priority missions, it's using the United States Navy as its benchmark for success. And the missions are the missions they seek are prioritized, emphasizing their combat capabilities in the near seas, but they also have global interests. The capabilities that are necessary to execute the far seas deployments are going to increase, and we're going to start seeing some of their larger decks, their large amphibious platforms, perhaps their aircraft carriers deploying into the Indian Ocean in near term. We do think that the Navy is likely to avoid conflict in the far seas unless its vital interests are a threat. But port access is a rate limiter, but it does appear the Navy would be able to capitalize on the ports that are around the world. So unchecked, the Navy's on track to be capable of supporting these defense white paper missions that have been specified in the next and within the next decade, and therefore to achieve what PRC expects of a world-class Navy. Now, I don't want to leave you on a down note of, hey, wow, look at where they're going. There's stuff that we can do about it. let's talk about it. If missions are what China is looking at to achieve its objective, if missions are the benchmark of success, then gosh, if we can influence their thinking of how good they are at executing those missions, we can affect their idea, or we can impact their perception of how close they are to achieving world-class status. So let's talk about the first one, sea control. Sea control, or as the mission said, of safeguarding national territorial sovereignty and maritime rights. If PRC perceives that United States Navy or allied ships are operating in waters close to China, or if we can manipulate the perceptions of where the PRC thinks that we are operating, that's going to undermine their confidence that they have control of those areas that they want to have sea control. Again, sea control is not controlling everything. It's finite controls of isolated little bodies of water, depending on where they want to be at any given time. The C5 ISRT, the command and control communications computers, that may be particular vulnerability for the PRC as it works to integrate all these new systems, all these new platforms, and integrating with the Air Force as they all come together. And undersea warfare capabilities do appear to be an area where they're lagging, an area where perhaps we may have an advantage that we could do something about, or at least cause them to perceive they are even further behind than they actually are, or depending on where they are. Second idea here of the mission of protecting overseas interests. That is, again, in Shen's words, of global strategic influence. Here, there's a chance for us to work with like-minded partners to limit how easy it is for Chinese Navy ships to go and visit some of these commercial ports after some of these deployments, and to limit their proficiency at operating at foreign ports. Also, the near seas requirements, this requirement for Taiwan that China has, the PLA has, gosh, if they are bottled up, focused on continually developing this Taiwan focus, in which they are, we see them doing, that may be the focus of their efforts and somewhat limit their ability to be focused on some of their global operations. And again, China's overseas logistics and sustainment, that does seem to be a particular vulnerability that perhaps we could capitalize on. And lastly, in technological innovation, export controls and other efforts to limit high-tech transfers, that may be a way to slow them in their ability to leapfrog. If we can stop them from getting the latest and greatest technologies, or slow their progress in getting some of these latest and greatest technologies, that may be a way that we can slow them down. And their pursuit of AI is both a crutch and a vulnerability. Sure, it can help them make decision-making things, but AI is only as good as the inputs that come in and the outputs that go out. Wrong information going in, wrong information out. There's a chance here to do something about it. So Beijing's perceptions concerning its world-class Navy status can be influenced by an agile and credible American and allied policies. With that, I'll open it up to a few questions. Thank you very much. All right, I'm going to field them, and my understanding is, correct me if I'm wrong, it's going to be just people in the room, right? People can send me nastygrams. If you're online, send me a nastygram. I'll get it. That's fine. But I'm happy to take a couple questions if there's anything here. I'll do my best. If not, I'll phone a friend. How's that? Oh, come on. There you
go. Good evening. Commander Brian DeMel, Navy. Thank you for a wonderful lecture. Just curious, when it comes to near seas, far seas, overseas operations, from a doctrinal perspective, do we see China being a bit more like us, rotational deployment, everybody gets a piece of leaving the home waters and such, or a bit more of a home fleet, far east fleet, if we go back to the old British model and stuff? Is that where they're going as they get more ships, or would be more like us, rotate through everything, give everybody a little bit more experience? And I guess a secondary question to that is, how is that going to impact their sea lift growth in the future? Thank you.
Yeah, listen, great question. And there's a tension that certainly exists within the Navy of how much they can allocate to kind of this near seas missions and this far seas requirements. How do they develop expertise in both at the same time? And what we're noticing, and what it appears, is that there is a real push to get expertise in far seas mission through a lot of different ships in the Navy, a lot of different ships, a lot of different crews, a lot of different people, through these escort task forces that are deploying out to the Gulf of Aden. So like I said, since 2008, we just completed the 45th one of this 3-ship set that has gone out to the Gulf of Aden and then deployed around the world to various locations afterwards. What we're finding in some Chinese leadership, as we've seen some folks that are getting promoted in their system, is they tend to be rewarding folks that have had those kinds of experience, that have gone out and that got this overseas experience. At the same time, they have to demonstrate their proficiency and they have to have the capabilities to operate really in the near seas. When I say near seas, we're talking about the Yellow Sea, we're talking about the East China Sea, South China Sea, Yellow Sea. So just these waters that are close to China within the first island chain, basically. So it is a both, but there is a primacy on right now the Taiwan mission, and then building up and getting some of that experience for that overseas mission as well, if that answers that. Great, thanks. Yeah.
Okay, can you hear me? Yeah, thanks, Chris. I enjoyed your lecture as well. You had a line on a slide about how establishing sea control near Taiwan is like the most difficult kind of thing. I was wondering, what is that relative to? And is the reason why you said that because of like potential U.S. responses?
Yeah. No, great clarification question, Reed. No, I appreciate it. Yeah, sea control around Taiwan in a contested environment would be incredibly difficult in that you can, I showed you the exercises. During an exercise, when no one's there, you can deploy ships, it's generally no problem. The second you get an adversary operating in the area, they have to contend with that adversary. So what we've seen in the exercises right now is deploying when no one's there. Now, the second you start introducing other variables in there, it starts getting much, much harder. And so that's where I was going on that. So, cool. Sure.
Thank you, Chris. That's a great lecture. Rich Paquette from Halsey Alpha. I was wondering, could you just quickly characterize like what that Taiwan Strait looks like? Because I think for some people, they don't really grasp the dimensions that we're talking about.
Sure, Rich. Hey, thanks. Great question. The Taiwan Strait, 90 miles across from the mainland to Taiwan. Taiwan itself, going out from Taiwan, you have a lot of mud flats that make it very, very shallow by Taiwan. It's also very, very choppy, very rough seas much of the year, making very limited windows in which the PRC could launch, let's say, an amphibious invasion across Taiwan. Now, the one thing I'll say is that at 90 miles across, just about every weapon system in the inventory can range over to Taiwan. And a little bit of hyperbole there, but you get my idea. So if PRC wants to do something against Taiwan, it has plenty of tools and plenty of resources to reach out and touch someone. Thanks, Rich. Hey, sure.
Good evening, sir. It was a great lecture. I have a question as far as the technological capabilities of these ships. The number they have, you said, is going to be potentially greater than ours. Are they on track as far as kicking up technologically and through strategic warfare?
Yeah, great. Let's just talk numbers here. According to the latest China military power report, China has 370 ships, all right? Some of the surface warfare guys in here will know better than I think we're pretty considerably below that in terms of numbers. So from a pure number standpoint, they're on track right now, I think by the end of this year to be somewhere around 395, by 2030 to be about 425 ships. They're on the ascendancy here. The technologies is a real good question. They are throwing a lot of technologies into their ships. And it's kind of like, I hate to use the analogy, riding a bike, building the spaceship as you go. I don't know what the analogy is there. It's that doing something as you're doing it. And they're integrating these technologies. They're playing with these technologies as they are developing the systems at the same time. They're stumbling along the way. There's some areas they're having some real challenges, but they're recognizing those challenges, and they're going back, they're finding what works well, what are the best practices, and the more they send different sets of ships out there to practice on different things, different approaches to doing things, they'll find kind of that best practice, and they'll hone in and say, okay, this is going to be our best practice. So, yes, a lot's getting thrown their way. This can slow things down. This can make, frankly, difficult for any Navy as you integrate so many different technologies. But they recognize that that's a challenge. And what I've seen over my career in watching China from a Navy that was a coastal Navy when I first came into the Navy would stay out for 3 days at a time because they didn't want to lose sight of land and they couldn't make water on their ships. And fast forward in my career, 30 years, while I was in the Navy, and now they're deploying to the Gulf of Aden and they're operating around the world. That's a pretty aggressive growth in capabilities. So yes, they have technological problems, but they're also really good at adapting and getting better at using them. So it's a fair question, though. Thanks. Yeah, sure. Okay. Sorry, you get to be the last one.
Good evening, sir. Lieutenant Vina, U.S. Navy. My question is basically, we talk a lot about the Taiwan Straits problem with the CCP and the messaging that they provide to the PLA Navy to be prepared for that mission. But as shown in your photos, a lot of those are not in the Taiwan Straits. My question is basically, what sort of messaging is the CCP providing to the PLA Navy regarding their objectives beyond those waters that we talk about a lot in the Straits?
I think when you see the activity happening, you're right. It's not necessarily all happening in the Taiwan Strait, but the mission, what that tells me is that a key Navy mission is not necessarily operations within the Taiwan Strait, although I think they'll have a role. The amphibious forces will certainly have a role in the Taiwan Strait, but it's that operations east of Taiwan, and those operations to deter any potential intervention by perhaps the United States or other forces that are coming in. So it's this idea you need to be able to develop the proficiencies at operating in those kind of high seas areas, and I think we're seeing a lot of effort in operating further away from China than really operating close in China in that really congested, contested environment right there in the Taiwan Strait. So I think we're going to continue to see, we'll see operations in the Taiwan Strait, but much more to the east of Taiwan, et cetera. Thanks. Great.
Thank you again for that dynamic and enthralling presentation, Captain Sharman. One more time, ladies and gentlemen.